But one thing that is clear is that it's not going to destroy the internet. And so CNN's crazed headlines about this and the Democrats' crazed talk about this, it's a wild exaggeration. How a regulatory issue that had very little impact on how the internet actually worked between 2015 and 2017, how that became a life or death scenario, just demonstrates the level of hysteria for people who really don't understand what the issue is, even on the most basic level. I'm not an expert on net neutrality. I don't pretend to be an expert on net neutrality. But the basic issue is not about the destruction of the internet as we know it. Okay, that's just patently insane. But Jimmy Kimmel went off on it, and here he is. I mean, Jimmy Kimmel, first of all, I feel like every time Jimmy Kimmel speaks politics now, he should be morally obligated to bring out his baby, to trot out his child, since he obviously makes emotional appeals on what he really should do, if he's not going to bring out his own kid to talk healthcare, what he really should do is he should bring out a poor homeless urchin, street urchin, who will no longer be able to access the internet at the public library for purposes of pornography. And he should just drape his arm around him. And then he should say, this poor child will no longer have internet because of net neutrality. He basically did that last night just without the poor street urchin. Again, I don't know what qualifies Jimmy Kimmel to talk about these things, and I'm happy for Jimmy Kimmel to, have a debate with somebody who knows about it. But Jimmy Kimmel doesn't want to do any of those things. He just wants to read Chuck Schumer agitprop. So here he is.
The FCC did something absolutely despicable today. They voted to put an end to net neutrality. Now, this is the rule that says everyone gets equal access to the internet. A big company or somebody selling crocheted owls from their house in the Midwest. Now, as long as they tell us they're doing it now, internet service providers will be allowed to slow down or block web traffic to any website or streaming service they like, which benefits the big telecom companies and does the opposite for all of us. But I just want to say thank you, President Trump. Thanks to you and this jackhole you appointed to run the FCC. Big corporations are about to take full control of the internet. So
it's like comedy. Everybody. It's like he's a jackhole, so it's comedy now. It's not just political. It's because he said jackhole. Get it? Ha, ha, ha. I love Jimmy Kimmel speaking on behalf of ABC, Disney, the biggest corporation on planet Earth, right? I mean, he's on ABC. Disney just bought Fox 21st Century, right? They just bought it, okay, outright. Disney is an enormous corporation. And here is Jimmy Kimmel talking on ABC's airwaves on what is basically an oligopoly, right? ABC was allowed to dominate the airwaves because it was one of 3 networks for most of its history. And here he is talking about, oh, those corporations, they're going to be controlling everything, those big corporations, because you know who doesn't know anything about big corporations is Jimmy Kimmel, right? And I love when he says that, like Grandma and her crochet website, that's the one that's going to pay the price for net neutrality being done away with. The whole point is that Netflix, Google, YouTube oppose it, not Grandma with her crochet website. No one cares about Grandma's crochet website. You'd think that Verizon's sitting around going, aha, now we got Grandma in the crosshairs, we're going to make her pay up. I mean, she wants her crochet website up there? I got to double her price. What absolute sheer nonsense. I mean, what he's saying doesn't even make any sense. And it neglects the fact that there are big corporations on both sides of this. Like, we're going to have a giant fight. Dave Burge, Iowa Hawk, had a great tweet on this. He basically said, I never thought that the end of the world was going to come over the people who actually provide the content to social media arguing over who should benefit from their content provision. The ISPs or the companies like Facebook. That's really what it is. Like the cows arguing over who should benefit more over their provision of the milk, the grocery store, the farmer. That's really all that's happening here. But it's just, it's insipid, and the level of ire is totally crazy. And again, people don't know about it. Like Jimmy Kimmel doesn't know what he's talking about here. Again, I'm not an expert, but I know more than Jimmy Kimmel. Right? An MSNBC anchor tried to do the same thing to a former FCC chairman. The former FCC chairman basically just stomped on him.
But that's one of the arguments for people in favor of removing net neutrality is that consumers will get more choice in the plans that they can buy. Why would they get more choice in plans if someone's not either subsidizing or able to be excluded from a particular plan? Why would I be able to drop what I pay on a monthly basis for internet if I'm not going to lose something for it?
Well, let's rewind the tape a little bit, which is, okay, so you're talking about consumers and entrepreneurs and discrimination in favor of your own product, like a Comcast product.
No, that's not what I'm talking about. Okay. I think we need to rewind and have this conversation again at some point, because you're making an argument that I'm not making. I'm saying that if someone has an advantage in streaming their content over the internet, an established player has an advantage because they've got the money to be able to buy better, faster, quicker access or prevent somebody else from getting it, that the incumbent is favored over the startup. That's the only point I wanted to make. That's the only point I'm making.
And that would be illegal. That's the point I'm making. What you just said is already illegal. It has been for a long time and will be going forward. So that's good news. Sorry, it's good news.
I'm not sure you and I are interpreting the same
well, I know it's good
information.
clickbait to say the internet's being destroyed, but it's not.
But Robert, I didn't say that. I don't know why you're coming on TV
you
to have an argument that I'm not having. I didn't say the internet's being destroyed.
You just said preferred.
I said free.
An ISP. If it's preferred, if you're favoring one over another, that's a violation of the law.
This would have been a much better conversation if we were just actually having a
We are having a conversation. I'm trying to teach you about the state of the law, which is what's going on today.
Appreciate that. Thanks very much. Robert McDowell was former FCC commissioner from 2006
I love that the anchor has
2013.
no idea what he's talking about. And the former FCC chairman keeps saying, it's illegal what you're talking about already. But none of that matters to anybody. The facts don't matter. All that matters is that Jimmy Kimmel is going to appear on television every night with a different victim who he can trot out. I think it would be a great segment, by the way. I think he should do Victim of the Night. Right, and you should bring, for every policy, he should just bring somebody out. So every time he talks tax cuts, Jimmy Kimmel should show up with some poor, crippled grandmother. And every time he talks about gun policy, he should bring out some kid who's been shot in the leg. And it would just be great. I think, and then he can cry over it. It'll be the weeping of the evening every single time. There are decent arguments on both sides for net neutrality. There really are. Okay, I'm going to try and be as objective as possible about this and lay out the argument for one side, and then lay out the argument for the other side, and then tell you why I come down on the side that I come down. Basically, here's how it works. You order your internet from Verizon. Verizon is an internet service provider. Netflix buys data from Verizon so that Netflix can actually be on the internet. And then you pay so that you have access to Netflix. Right? This is all common sense. This is how the internet works. Well, Verizon is as an ISP, or Sprint is an ISP. Sprint's an ISP. Comcast is an ISP. And some of these ISPs, they compete with one another, and one of the things that they want to do is they want the ability to privilege certain content above other content when it comes to charging them. The reason for this is that basically right now, Netflix, for example, takes up an enormous amount of bandwidth for whatever ISP it is working with, and that drives up the price for bandwidth for smaller providers. So it is quite possible that an ISP may launch that wants to charge Netflix more per byte of data, and therefore drive the price down for the other people who are using the internet, right? Or it's possible that the ISP may say to Netflix, listen, you want to load faster than other sites, you can pay us a premium. All of this is fine, right? I don't see a huge problem with any of this. The only problem with any of this is if there is a monopoly or an oligopoly, and here's the argument in favor of net neutrality. So let's say that you only have one internet service provider in your area. The reason that you probably only have one internet service provider in your area is because a lot of local government regulations make it difficult to build an ISP. In order to lay down broadband, you actually have to have government rights of way, and a lot of local governments will put conditions on the various companies that want to come in. So that creates a sort of oligopoly situation. The idea here is, let's say that there's Comcast, and Comcast owns Netflix. So let's just say they bought Netflix. And they want to help Netflix, but they want to hurt Hulu. So they slow down artificially the speed on Hulu, encouraging people to subscribe to Netflix instead of subscribing to Hulu, right? This is the great fear, that Comcast is basically going to strangle in the crib competition to its vertically integrated companies. And this is not an idle worry. In a monopoly situation, you theoretically could do this. So the anti-net neutrality people will say, listen, we already have anti-competition regulations in place, right? You can actually prosecute monopolies that are acting as monopolies. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, can crack down. The FCC can crack down on this. You don't need to basically mandate that all traffic be treated the same or be charged the same because, again, maybe you want to charge Netflix more because it's taking up more bandwidth. Maybe you want to charge the pornography company that's taking up an enormous amount of bandwidth on your computer more. Maybe you want to do all of those things. So, everybody who is in favor of net neutrality says, well, the ISPs shouldn't be allowed to do that. When you buy an internet uplink, then you should basically get all the pages at the same rate and for a given price. But the truth is that you're actually redistributing costs, right? Let's say that my grandmother doesn't use Netflix. Well, her internet price, the price that Comcast is charging for her, is actually going to be higher than it normally would be if, for example, they could divide out Netflix and have you pay a subscription fee for a faster internet service that gets Netflix faster. Right? She's actually subsidizing me because I'm using Netflix and she isn't. She doesn't have to use very much data. I have to use more data. And there's a sort of redistributive mechanism that happens. So these are the two arguments. One is that oligopoly means that the government has to come in and regulate the ISPs so that they don't strangle Netflix or YouTube or any other outlet that they want to strangle. And people against net neutrality say, well, if you actually want to foster competition in the ISP space, if you want a proper distribution of cost, then you actually need to let competition take over. Now, in order for competition to take over, it's not enough for the federal government just to get rid of net neutrality. The federal government also needs to encourage all of these companies to start investing in local areas, and local governments need to start encouraging all of the ISPs to invest in building new broadband networks. Okay, so those are the arguments. The reason I come down against net neutrality is because I don't think that the answer to oligopoly is more oligopoly. Once you enshrine the idea and create barriers to entry that every piece of data has to be treated the same, then what is the comparative advantage of a small startup company as opposed to Comcast? The answer is none. It's going to be very difficult for them to compete in that market. That is why you see all of these small ISPs actually in favor of getting rid of net neutrality. The companies you see in favor of keeping net neutrality are companies like Netflix that don't want to pay more for that fast toll lane on the internet highway.